For 6 years, he rescued people from forced marriages and the slave trade. Now he is dead. And he is kneeling in a body that isn't his own, in a stone hall where he is ordered to choose one living girl out of 5. He counts the seconds. Then he opens his mouth and breaks a ritual that is 7,000 years old. The cold stone digs into his knees. A silk cord tightens around his wrists so tightly that he can no longer feel his fingers. The air smells of incense and blood. Daniel Seo opens his eyes and doesn't understand a thing. A second ago, there was an intersection, headlights, a crash. Now there's a stone hall the size of a church, and hundreds of people in black are looking down at him. The body is unfamiliar. The arms are thinner. The skin is lighter. This isn't his body. But the pain in his knees is real, and the old man in the golden robe standing before him is real. The old man speaks in Old Korean, the kind of language Daniel's grandmother used to swear in when she thought her grandson couldn't hear her. Daniel can hear him, and he understands every word. Heir to the Seo clan, it's your turn. Choose your chain. Daniel lowers his gaze. 5 girls are kneeling on the floor before him. White robes, bare feet. Around each of their necks is a thin collar made of greenish stone. The living jade pulses faintly, like the pulse of a sick animal. The girl on the far left has bruises on her wrists, visible even beneath her sleeves. The youngest girl on the right has a split lip and eyes as empty as those of a child who has stopped crying because she realized it's pointless. The one in the middle holds her back so straight that her spine looks as if it's about to snap. And Daniel understands everything. Not through logic, professionally. 6 years on the job, hundreds of faces like these, hundreds of bruises like these. He recognizes it instantly, just as a surgeon recognizes a fracture by the angle of a limb. This is an auction of living people, only without price tags. The old man repeats himself. Choose one. The rest will go to others. Daniel is silent. He's thinking, not out of fear, out of habit. A lawyer always thinks before opening his mouth. He doesn't know where he is, doesn't know when it is, doesn't know the rules of this place. But he knows what a person being sold looks like. And he knows that if he chooses one, the other 4 will to people who think this is normal. 10 seconds. The room begins to murmur. Someone coughs. Someone laughs. The old man frowns and opens his mouth to repeat it a 3rd time. Daniel beats him to it. He raises his head and speaks in that very old Korean. I'll take all 5 of them. And with each of them, I'll break the chain right now. In this hall, in front of witnesses, by the right of the chooser. Silence falls over the hall like a slab of stone. The old man opens his mouth and can't close it. The guards at the doors exchange glances. The girl with the broken back turns her head for the first time and looks at him. Not with hope, with suspicion. And rightly so. Hope from a stranger is the most dangerous thing in the world. And then the jade shatters. All 5 rings at once. The sound is thin and clear, like a snapped string. Green shards rain down onto the stone and fade away. And in that very second, a line flashes right behind his breastbone. Daniel sees it not with his eyes. He sees it as one sees a thought. The celestial accounting system. Activated. First choice registered. Credited. An infinite number of attribute points. Daniel doesn't understand what this means. He doesn't understand anything at all, but he knows for certain that the jade around the necks of the 5 girls is no longer glowing. And that's enough for now. The hall erupts, not with applause, but with screams. The priest howls that this is sacrilege. Someone in the front row jumps to his feet and demands execution. The guards grab the shafts of their spears. Daniel is on his knees with his hands bound and realizes he has 30 seconds to live. And then he does what he's done in court every time things went south. He speaks quietly, quieter than the screaming hall, quiet enough that the priest has to silence the others to hear him. I did not violate the code. The hall falls silent, not because they believed him, because the statement is so brazen that everyone wants to hear how he'll wriggle out of it. The Code of the Single Chain, Article 1. A man of the warrior class is obligated to appear at the harvest and choose one chain. I appeared. I chose. 5 times. The code says one chain, but it doesn't say once. The priest freezes. His eyes dart about. He's trying to recall the text. Daniel knows he's right. He doesn't know how he knows. Maybe from this body's memory. Maybe from something else. But the wording is flawed. Like any law that's 7,000 years old and that no one has ever tested. And Daniel drives the point home. The chains are broken. The jade went out on its own. If that's impossible, let the priest explain why the stone went out without his command. Either the ritual has accepted my choice or the ritual is broken. In the first case, I'm in the right. In the second, we must halt the entire harvest and inspect the remaining chains. Which does the temple prefer? It's a bluff. A pure bluff. Daniel has no idea how the jade works, but he knows how people in power operate. They'll never choose an inspection. An inspection is an admission of error. An admission of error is a loss of face. The priest remains silent for 7 seconds, then 8. Then he signals to the guards. The spears are lowered. Heir Seo will be investigated. Until the investigation is complete, he is forbidden to leave his home. The captives remain with him until the temple reaches a decision. Daniel nods. His hands are untied. He stands up. His legs are so stiff that he almost falls, but manages to steady himself. He turns to the 5 girls. They are still on their knees. No one has told them to stand up. You may stand up. No one stands up. Of course they don't. To them, he's just another man on a long list of men who've decided their fate without asking. The fact that he shattered the jade means nothing. For now, it's just another cage. Daniel doesn't press the issue. He turns and walks toward the exit. His body's memory knows the way. Behind him, he hears a whisper. Quiet. Angry. Frightened. They've remembered him. They already hate him. Fine. Out on the street, he sees the sky of this world for the first time. It's violet. 2 suns. One white, one golden. The mountain peaks on the horizon are lost in the clouds. The air is thick and sweet, like after a thunderstorm. Daniel stands on the steps of the temple and realizes one simple thing. He's dead. He's in someone else's body. He's in a world where people are sold at ceremonies. No weapons, no allies, no plan. Just a voice in his head telling him he has an infinite number of points. And 5 girls behind him who hate him. Daniel Seo, 27 years old, a family law attorney, specializing in forced marriages and human trafficking. He smirks, because for the first time in his life, his professional experience aligns perfectly with his location. He heads toward the Seo family home. His feet know the way. The Seo family home turned out not to be a house at all. It was a manor. 3 courtyards, 2 wings, walls of gray stone 3 times a man's height, a gate of black wood with bronze rivets, and not a single servant in sight. Daniel stopped at the gate and looked out at the empty courtyard. His body's memory told him the Seo family had long since fallen on hard times. The servants had left. Only the cook remained. The old gardener comes by twice a week. The rest is desolate. Daniel pushed open the gate and entered. 5 girls followed him. They walked in silence, keeping their distance. They didn't speak to one another either. each kept to herself, like 5 people standing on the same cliff but falling separately. Daniel walked through the first courtyard, then the second. He found the main hall, bare walls, a dusty floor, a single table. On the table, a cool-down teapot and a cup. Someone had lived here before him, the former owner of this body. Daniel sat down at the table. The 5 girls remained standing at the entrance. He didn't invite them to the table. He didn't say, "Make yourselves at home." He didn't smile. He knew from experience, a person who's just been set free doesn't want to be smiled at. He wants to be shown where the door is. Daniel said, "There are 5 rooms in the east wing. I'll go check right now to see if the doors have locks. If not, I'll bolt them from the inside. Only you will have the keys. No one else, not even me. My room is in the west wing. There are 2 courtyards and a wall between us. Meals will be served in the dining hall in the morning and evening." He stood up and walked to the east wing, without looking back. Silence behind him. No one had moved, but he could hear breathing. 5 different rhythms. One fast, one ragged, one almost inaudible. The east wing was in better condition than the rest of the house. 5 rooms along the hallway. The doors were sturdy. They had bolts. Old but functional. Daniel checked each one. He slid them shut, opened them, slid them shut again. They worked. He returned to the main hall. The girls were standing in the same spot. He placed 5 wooden plates on the table. They were markers for the bolts, something like keys. 1 plate, 1 door. Daniel said, "The first room on the right, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. Pick any one. The order doesn't matter. Take a marker for yourself." He took 3 steps back from the table, then 2 more, to put some distance between himself and them. Another habit. During consultations, he always sat farther away from the client than necessary. The oldest one moved first. That one, with her straight back and cold eyes. She walked over to the table. She looked at the plates. She looked at Daniel, and she said, "If this is a game, I know it." Daniel replied, "This isn't a game. These are locks." She took the outermost plate and walked away without looking back. The others followed her, silently, one after another. The youngest took the last one. Her hands were shaking so badly that she almost dropped the token. Daniel didn't help her pick it up. He didn't reach out his hand. He didn't smile. She picked it up herself. A minute later, the east wing corridor filled with sounds. 5 doors closed, 5 bolts were drawn, and silence fell. Daniel stood alone in the empty hall. He exhaled. His hands were shaking. It turned out he'd been holding them steady all this time through sheer willpower. Now he could let go. He sat down on the floor because his legs gave out. He leaned his back against the wall, and he began to think. So, he was dead. He was in another world. He was in a body that wasn't his own. A young body, 21 years old, weak. This body's memories were fragmented. Name, Seo Jaeho. Clan, Seo, Northern Haeju. An impoverished clan, the last heir. Summoned to the harvest because he had reached the required age. That's all the body remembers. The rest must be figured out. Daniel closed his eyes and summoned a line of text. It appeared immediately. Heavenly accounting system. Status. Active. Attribute points. Infinity. Available attributes. Strength, dexterity, stamina, perception. Voice, memory, thought speed. Daniel looked at the list. In every game he'd seen his nephew play, the hero would immediately max out strength, or magic, or agility. Daniel isn't a hero. Daniel is a lawyer. He allocated his first points to memory, 10,000 units. The world flickered and returned. But now Daniel remembered everything. Every word of the Codex of the Single Chain, all 412 articles, all 700 amendments, all the precedents stored in Seo Jaehyun's body's memory like fragments of lessons he'd half listened to. Now they stood in his mind like a bookshelf with folders, organized, clear, accessible. Daniel invested another 10,000 in perception. The world flickered again. When he opened his eyes, he noticed that a tiny spider lived in a crack in the ceiling, that the left wall was tilted 2 degrees from the vertical, that the air smelled not only of dust, but also of dry grass from under the floorboards, that a sound was drifting from the east wing. Someone is crying, quietly, into a pillow. The youngest one, Jaya. Daniel didn't go there. He knew. Not now. She needs to cry it out alone behind a closed door. This is the first time she's had a closed door. He invested 5,000 in The Voice. The world flickered for the 3rd time. Daniel opened his mouth and spoke aloud. Test. His voice had changed. Not the volume, not the timbre, something else, something in the very fabric of the sound, as if every word now sank into the listener's ear a little deeper than usual, a little more precisely, a little more weightily. The voice of a lawyer who wins a case not because he shouts, but because every word is in its right place. Good. Daniel got up from the floor. He found the cook in the kitchen, an elderly woman named Han Jeongok, small, thin, her hands red from a lifetime of laundry. She looked at Daniel without fear and without respect. She said, I heard what you did at Harvest. The whole town's talking about it. You're either a genius or a dead man. Daniel replied, most likely both. I need dinner for 6. What's in the pantry? Han Jeongok snorted. Rice, beans, a little dried fish. Daniel nodded. Good. Dinner in the dining hall at 6. Set out 6 bowls. If anyone doesn't show up, don't clear them away. Let it sit until morning. Han Jeongok gave him a long look. Then she nodded and went into the kitchen. Daniel returned to the West Wing. He sat down at the table in his room. He found a brush. He found ink. He found a blank scroll. And he began to write. He wrote until evening. 4 scrolls. On the first one, a document regarding free status. 5 copies. Legal wording based on Article 217 of the Code. A section on captives whose binding ritual had not been completed. Technically, the chains snapped before activation. Therefore, the binding did not take place. Therefore, the girls are not captives. Therefore, they are free citizens under the temporary guardianship of the Seo clan. It's a fine line, but it exists. On the second scroll, a list of questions. Who runs the temple? How many priests are in the city? Which clans control northern Haeju? Is there a court? Is there an appeals process? Is there a precedent for breaking the chains? On the third scroll, a list of what the girls need. Clothing, shoes, soap, combs, food other than rice and beans, a doctor, a female doctor. It must be a woman. On the fourth scroll, 1 sentence. He didn't understand why he'd written it. His hand moved on its own. The sentence was this. I've already done this job. Just now, without a trial. That evening, Daniel came into the dining hall. 6 bowls stood on the table. Rice, beans, fish. Simple. Hot. He sat down, waited 10 minutes. No one came. He ate alone. He washed his bowl. He left the other 5 untouched. He went to his room. He locked the door. He lay down. He didn't sleep. He listened. At 3 in the morning, he heard footsteps, light, barefoot. Someone walked down the dining hall corridor. A lid clinked. Rice rustled. Then more footsteps. Then more, one after another. Within 20 minutes, all 5 bowls were empty. Daniel lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. He didn't smile. He wasn't happy. He knew it meant nothing. A hungry person eats. It's a reflex, not trust. But it's the first step. The first of 1,000. In the morning, he got up before dawn. He went to the dining room. 5 empty bowls stood on the table, washed. He looked at them for a long time. Then he went to the kitchen to help Han Jeongok prepare breakfast. Daniel set up the house and put the 5 girls in separate rooms with locks on the inside. He uploaded the system's first modules, memory, perception, and voice, and instantly memorized the entire single-chain codex. The girls didn't come out for dinner, but ate their food secretly during the night. Daniel drew up documents granting free status to each of them. On the 3rd day, the ambassador arrived. Daniel knew he would come. The system had warned him. Not directly, it doesn't speak in words. It flashes. A warning. A threat. Threat level? Medium. Daniel was standing in the courtyard when the gates swung open. 4 horsemen in red armor. The banner of the Hwang clan. A dragon on a gold field. The ambassador dismounted first. A tall man in his 40s with a beard braided into 3 plaits. Eyes like 2 nails. He surveyed the courtyard, the leaning wall, the cracked tiles, the weeds between the stones, and he smirked. The ambassador said that the Hwang clan demanded the return of 5 items of property stolen by the Seo heir during the harvest festival, as well as compensation in the amount of 100,000 gold coins. Daniel stood before him in a simple robe, unarmed, without an entourage, barefoot because that morning he'd been helping Han Jeongok mop the floors and hadn't had time to put on his shoes. He looked exactly like someone who shouldn't be taken seriously. It was intentional. Daniel replied, 100,000? That's an interesting figure. The ambassador nodded. That's the standard price for 5 high-ranking chains. Daniel shook his head. No. That's the price for 5 active chains. But the chains were severed in the harvest hall in the presence of witnesses authorized to make the decision. The jade stone went dark. The priest saw it. Over 200 people saw it. Legally, the chains no longer exist. The ambassador frowned. Daniel continued. You're demanding compensation for an item that doesn't exist. This isn't a claim. It's fraud. And it's not against me. It's against the temple. Because it was the temple that conducted the ritual, and it was the temple that recorded the severing. If the Hwang clan claims that the chains are worth 100,000, then the Hwang clan is claiming that the temple allowed property worth 100,000 to be destroyed and did not intervene. This is an accusation of negligence against the priests. Article 304 of the Code, Fraud against the Temple. The ambassador L stopped smirking. Daniel said, the punishment under Article 304? Seizure of the clan's lands in favor of the temple. Confiscation of all assets belonging to the accusing clan. And demotion of the heir's rank by 2 levels. I've already drafted the complaint. It's ready to be sent to the 7th Lotus Chancellery. Daniel pulled a scroll from his sleeve. He had written it last night, just in case. The ambassador looked at the scroll. The Seo clan's seal at the bottom, the signature. The ambassador didn't turn pale. He turned green. Daniel said, but I understand that you've come a long way, and I respect protocol. That's why I'm proposing a settlement. The Hwang clan will recognize the 5 girls as free citizens of Haeju, under the guardianship of the Seo clan. In exchange, I'll withdraw the complaint and we'll part ways with no further claims against each other. You have 2 hours to decide. The ambassador stood motionless. His 4 guards stood motionless as well. The horses shifted their hooves. The wind fluttered the banner bearing a dragon. Daniel waited. He knew how to wait. 6 years of negotiations had taught him one thing. Once you've made an offer, stay silent. The first one to speak loses. The ambassador spoke first. He said he needed to contact his clan. Daniel nodded. You may use the guest hall. Tea will be served in a minute. The ambassador went into the guest hall. Daniel remained in the courtyard. Han Jeongok brought the tea. The ambassador stayed in the hall for 40 minutes. Then he came out. In his hand, he held a signed declaration. The 5 young women of the Hwang clan and the harvest captives were recognized as free citizens of Jeju. The Hwang clan withdrew its claims. The clan's seal, the ambassador's signature. Daniel took the document. He checked the wording, every word, every character. It was in order. He handed the complaint back to the ambassador. The ambassador burned it right there in the courtyard and left without saying goodbye. The gates closed. Daniel stood in the courtyard with the document in his hand. His legs held him up. His arms held him up. His face held him up. And then the gates closed completely, and Daniel sat down on the steps and began to shake, his whole body, like after an accident. Because it was a bluff. The complaint was genuine. The wording was correct. But Daniel had no idea whether the 7th Lotus's office would accept a complaint from an impoverished family against one of the 7 great clans. Most likely not. Most likely, they would burn the complaint without even reading it. But the ambassador didn't know that, and Daniel hadn't told him. The system flashed. 12,000 points. Trial class. Diplomatic. Nonviolent. Bonus. His first victory over a higher-ranked opponent without striking a blow. Daniel sat on the steps, trembling, and stared at the flashing numbers in his head. Then he heard footsteps. He turned around. Hwang Sonmi was standing in the doorway, the eldest, the daughter of the Hwang clan, the very same clan whose ambassador Daniel had just gotten rid of. She stood leaning against the doorframe, looking at him, not with gratitude, with something else. Daniel held her gaze. She said, "You just deceived my father." Daniel replied, "No, I deceived his ambassador." "Those are 2 different things." She raised an eyebrow slightly. Daniel said, "And it wasn't a deception. All the facts in the complaint are true. All the charges are accurate. The only thing the envoy didn't know was that the chancellery would most likely reject it. But I'm not obligated to inform the opposing side of the weaknesses in my position. That's not a lie. That's negotiation." Sonmi stared at him for another 5 seconds. Then she said, "My father sold me to save my brothers. You know that." Daniel nodded. "I figured as much," she said. "You're no hero. Heroes don't tremble on the steps." Daniel said, "No, not a hero, just a lawyer." She turned and walked away. But it was the first time she'd looked him in the eye. That evening, Daniel sat down at the desk in his room and opened the system interface. 12,000 new points. He invested 5,000 in thought speed. The world slowed down for a split second and then returned to normal speed. But now Daniel felt his brain working faster. Not like a computer, like a chess player who sees 3 moves ahead instead of 1. He invested the remaining 7,000 in memory. Now he remembered not only the single-chain codex, he remembered the trade codes of the 3 neighboring regions, the land laws of Southern Hedge, the statutes of the Black and White Lotus temples, and something else, something hidden at the very bottom of this body's memory, a snippet, a fragment of a lesson. The teacher had spoken to the young Seo Jaeho a long time ago, a very long time ago. The Seo clan was different. Great. The clan's founder was a lawmaker. His name was Seo Jaeho. He was killed at the assembly. The teacher said nothing more. Daniel wrote that name on a scroll, Seo Jaeho. He underlined it twice. Then he went to sleep. Footsteps again at night, the clanging of bowls again. Breakfast in the dining hall was eaten before dawn. But today, one bowl wasn't on the table. It stood on the steps at the entrance to the west wing. Rice with fish, covered with a cloth, still warm. Daniel looked at it. He looked at the east wing. All the doors were closed. He didn't know which of the 5 had left him the food. He didn't bother to find out. He sat down on the steps and ate his breakfast. The first breakfast that someone had prepared for him, not out of pity or a sense of duty, but simply because he too was a human being who needed to eat. The rice was a little overcooked. It was the best rice he'd ever had. The Hwan clan's ambassador arrived to demand the return of the girls and compensation of 100,000 gold pieces. Daniel dismantled his arguments legally and, by bluffing with a complaint of fraud, forced him to sign an acknowledgement of the free status of all 5. For the first time, Sonmi spoke to him and looked him in the eye. Daniel discovered the name of the Seo clan's founder, Seo Jaeho, in the body's memory. A week passed. Daniel didn't count the days. He counted the steps. Every day, one of the 5 took a small step. On the 4th day, Gia left her room before dawn. She was sitting on the floor in the hallway of the east wing, hugging her knees and staring at the wall. Daniel walked past her. He didn't stop. He didn't ask how she was doing. He didn't sit down next to her. He just walked by. But he slowed his pace, just a little, so she would see him. So she would understand that he had seen her and done nothing. That's important. For someone who's used to any attention ending in pain, being seen and left alone is a gift. On the 5th day, Park Eunhae, the healer, went out into the garden. Daniel watched from the window as she stood in front of a flower bed with withered grasses. She stood there for about 20 minutes. Then she dropped to her knees and began pulling out the weeds. Her hands moved confidently, with practice. These were hands that knew plants. On the 6th day, Kim Ha-in, the dancer, the loudest of the 5, the first to speak. Not with Daniel, with Han Jeongok. Daniel heard from the hallway. Ha-in asked the cook why she worked here. Han Jeongok replied, "Where else would I go?" Ha-in was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I have nowhere to go either." Han Jeongok said, "Then peel the radish since you're already up." Daniel heard the sound of a knife on a vegetable and left. On the 7th day, nothing happened. Sometimes the uneventful days are the most important ones. Daniel spent that day poring over the scrolls. The system showed him a new parameter. Threat level. House Seo. Current, high. Sources, 3. The Hwang clan. Objective, revenge. Method, unknown at this time. Council of the 7 clans. Objective, precedent. Method, legal pressure. Unknown. Objective, unknown. Method, unknown. The third source was the most troubling. The system could not identify it. This meant that someone powerful enough to hide from a 7,000-year-old artifact was already setting their sights on the Seo house. Daniel recorded this in his journal. He started the journal on the 2nd day. A thick scroll, leather-bound. On the first page was the title, The Records of Seo Jaeho. Chronology. Everything went into the journal. Every fact, every observation, names, dates, details. Daniel knew the value of documentation. In his past life, a single phone number jotted down in time had saved a woman from her husband who was about to kill her. Documentation is a weapon. Silent, slow, deadly. On the 8th day, a woman came to the Seo household. Not a girl, a woman, about 50 years old, dressed like a market vendor. She said she was a doctor. Daniel had hired her through a middleman at the market back on the 3rd day. He had specifically sought out a woman, specifically 1/40, specifically not from the aristocracy. Her name was Oh Bo-ki, petite, plump, with hands that smelled of wormwood and mint. Daniel led her into the parlor. He said, "I have 5 girls in my house. They need to be examined, but only if they agree. You do not enter the room without permission. You do not touch them without permission. You don't ask questions about how they sustained their injuries. If they're silent, you're silent. If they're crying, you wait. Obok-hee looked at him the way people look at someone who's stating the obvious, but for some reason needs to say it out loud. She said, "I've been treating women for 30 years. Daniel nodded. "Then you know." Obok-hee nodded. "I know." He escorted her to the east wing. He knocked on the first door. Sonmi's door. Silence. Then a voice. "What?" Daniel said, "The doctor is here. A woman. If you want, she'll examine you. If you don't, she'll leave." Silence. 10 seconds. 20. The latch clicked. The door opened a crack. Sonmi looked at Obok-hee, then at Daniel, then back at Obok-hee, and she opened the door wider. Daniel left. He waited in the main hall. An hour. 2 hours. Obok-hee emerged from the rooms one by one. She entered the next one. 4 out of 5 doors opened. The 5th remained closed. Lee Soyeon, the former captain of the guard. Daniel wasn't surprised. A warrior who had been disarmed and brought to her knees wouldn't let a stranger near her, not even a woman, not even a doctor. That's normal. Daniel didn't press the issue. Obok-hee came out and sat down across from Daniel. Her face was ashen. She said, "The youngest has 2 broken ribs. They've healed crookedly. The one who's silent, Eunhae, scars on her back. Old ones, lots of them. The bright-eyed one, Hyun, injury to her left wrist. Someone twisted it repeatedly. The oldest one, Sonmi. Outwardly, nothing's wrong. Inside, she endured something I don't want to put into words." Daniel listened in silence. His face was like a mask. He knew how to do that. 6 years of practice. Inside, everything was burning. But his face was like a mask. Because if the doctor saw his rage, she'd decide that he was angry not at those who did this, but at those to whom it was done. That's how the world works. That's how perception works. That's why the mask. Daniel asked, "What do you need for treatment?" Obok-hee listed them. Herbs, bandages, ointments, needles, clean cloth, a separate room for treatments. Daniel said, "Make a list. I'll buy them today. A room in the south wing. You and they will have a key." "Not me." Obok-hee looked at him again with a lingering gaze. Then she said, "You're a strange man, Heir Seo." Daniel replied, "Perhaps." "Leave the bill for the services on the table." She left. Daniel sat down at the table and took out a notebook. He wrote everything down, every injury, every detail, every name Obok-hee mentioned in passing, the names of those who did it, the names of those who could have prevented it, the names of those who watched and remained silent. This notebook will become the most dangerous document in Haeju. But for now, it was just a notebook. For now. That evening, Daniel sat in the courtyard and gazed at the violet sky with its 2 suns. Both were setting, one behind the mountains, the other behind the clouds. Double shadows fell. The world was beautiful, monstrously beautiful, and monstrously cruel, just like the world he had come from. Footsteps behind him. Daniel didn't turn around. Someone sat down next to him, at arm's length, no closer. He glanced sideways. Zaya, the youngest, 16 years old. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the sky. They sat like that in silence for about 10 minutes. Then Zaya said, "No one has ever called me by my name." Daniel turned toward her. She said, "On the street, they called me, 'Hey,' or 'Get lost,' or nothing at all. They just kicked me. At the harvest, they called me Number 5. I have a name, but no one has said it in so long that I sometimes forget it myself. Daniel said, Zaya. She flinched, her whole body, as if struck, but not from a blow. From the fact that someone had spoken aloud a sound she'd grown accustomed to thinking didn't exist. Daniel said it again. Jia. She began to cry, quietly, silently. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. Daniel didn't hug her. He didn't put his hand on her shoulder. He didn't say everything would be all right. He just sat there beside her and remained silent while she cried. Because sometimes a person doesn't need words. They need someone who sits beside them and doesn't leave. 10 minutes later, she stopped. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She stood up. She left, without saying a word. The door to her room closed. The bolt clicked. Daniel sat alone on the steps. The system flashed. Plus 3,000 points. Test category, human, non-violent. Bonus, no. Just 3,000 points for calling the girl by her name? Daniel closed the interface. He didn't need points for that, but the system saw it differently. During the first week, the girls began coming out of their rooms one by one. Daniel hired a female doctor, Oh Bok-hee, who examined 4 of them and documented their injuries. Daniel began keeping a log, recording the violations and the names of those responsible. Jia spoke to him for the first time, and he called her by name. Lee Soyeon refused to be examined. The system identified 3 sources of threat to the Seo household. On the 10th day, the killer arrived. Daniel hadn't slept. The system woke him at 3 in the morning. Alert, threat, critical, distance, 40 meters, approaching. He lay in the darkness and listened. With his perception set at 25,000 units, the night was almost transparent. He could hear the wind swaying a branch of the elm tree by the gate, a cat sneaking across the roof of the south wing, someone's feet in soft boots stepping along the top edge of the wall. 1 pair of feet, 1 person, light on their feet, fast, professional. Daniel got up. He got dressed. He stepped out into the courtyard. He stood in the middle of the open space between the west and east wings and waited. The moon was full. The white sun had set, but the golden one hung on the horizon, casting a faint copper glow. The assassin leaped down from the wall 30 seconds later. He landed softly, almost silently, but Daniel heard him. He was standing 10 paces away. Black clothes, a mask, a short knife in his right hand. His left hand was free, the stance of a professional. The assassin saw Daniel and stopped. He hadn't expected his target to be standing in the middle of the courtyard, waiting for him. Daniel said, 100,000. The assassin froze. Daniel said, your contract is worth 100,000 gold pieces, maybe less, but I think 100,000, because the Hwan clan has just lost face and wants to regain it quickly. And quick contracts are expensive. The assassin didn't move. The knife glinted in the coppery light. Daniel continued, you have 2 options. First, you carry out the contract. You kill me. You get 100,000. But in 3 days, a scroll will land on the table at the 7th lotus. I wrote it yesterday and entrusted it to someone you'll never find. The scroll contains names, dates, and details, including the name of your client, and a description of you, which I'm memorizing right now. Height, about 5 feet 9 inches. Weight, about 140 pounds. A scar on your left hand between your thumb and index finger. An old one, from a knife. The assassin flinched. He didn't understand how Daniel could see the scar through his glove in the dark. Daniel could see it. 25,000 units of perception. The glove was slightly thinner where the scar was. The fabric was stretched differently. A minor detail. But minor details are all it takes. Daniel said, Option 2. You don't carry out the contract. You walk away. You take the letter I'll give you to your client. The letter contains a single line. The next person you send will also walk away, but without the letter. He was bluffing. Of course he was bluffing. If the killer decides to strike, Daniel will die. He has no combat skills, zero cultivation. The body of a 21-year-old bookish boy from an impoverished family. One strike, and that's it. But the assassin didn't know that. The assassin saw a man standing alone in the middle of the courtyard at night, unarmed, calmly describing his scars. A man who behaves like that is either a madman or so strong that a knife doesn't scare him. The killer didn't want to find out which was true. He put the knife away, slowly. Daniel pulled a folded scroll from his sleeve. He held it out. The killer took it. He gave Daniel a long look and left, through the wall, just as quietly as he'd come. Daniel stood in the courtyard. His legs gave way. He sat down right on the stones. His heart was pounding so hard, his ribs ached. His hands were shaking. His forehead was damp. He nearly died. Again. For the second time in 10 days. The system flashed. 8,000 points. Trial class. Critical. Nonviolent. Bonus. Threat neutralization. Daniel closed his eyes. He put all 8,000 points into perception. Now 33,000 units. He could hear the killer running across the rooftops, moving away. 3 blocks. 5. Gone. Daniel opened his eyes and saw Lee Soyeon. She was standing at the entrance to the east wing, a short sword in her hand. Daniel didn't know where she'd gotten it, but she was ready. She'd been standing there from the very beginning. She'd heard everything. She was ready to intervene. Daniel looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "Thank you." She replied, "You're welcome. You're an idiot." Daniel smirked. "I've been told that before." Soyeon sheathed her sword. She looked at him again. She said, "Tomorrow morning, I'll inspect the perimeter. Your security is non-existent. The wall on the south side is destroyed over 2 bays. The east gate can be opened with a fingernail. This isn't a house. It's a sieve." Daniel nodded. "I'll be grateful." She nodded. She left. The bolt clicked, but the door didn't close all the way. A small gap, 2 fingers wide. She'd left the door ajar, for the first time in 10 days. Daniel noticed and said nothing. At dawn, Soyeon went out. In her hands, a wooden stick instead of a sword. She walked around the entire house, all 3 courtyards, the entire perimeter wall. She peered into every corner. She checked every door. She returned 2 hours later. She sat down across from Daniel at the table in the main hall and said, 23 vulnerable points. I've made a list." Daniel looked at the list. Neat handwriting. Clear markings. Each point was numbered, with the description of how to secure it. It was the handwriting of an officer, a man accustomed to writing reports and bearing responsibility for other people's lives. Daniel said, "I don't have the money for masons." Soyeon said, "There are stones in the yard. I have my hands. I need mortar in 3 days." Daniel nodded. "The mortar will be here tomorrow." Soyeon stood up. She stopped at the door. Without turning around, she said, "That night, when that man came, why didn't you call me?" Daniel replied, "Because this is my house. My problems. You don't have to fight for me here." Soyeon turned around. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, even with 33,000 perception points. She said, "You really are an idiot." And she left. Daniel wrote in his log, Day 10, assassination attempt, mercenary. Level, professional. Client, presumably the Hwan clan. Result, averted through negotiations. Casualties, none. Note, Lee Soyeon, former captain, ready to defend. Though she won't admit it out loud yet. He closed the log. The system displayed an updated threat level. The Hwan clan, raised to critical. Council of the 7 clans, no change. Unknown, no change. But a fourth item had appeared. Mercenary brotherhoods. Target, contract, method, direct elimination. 4 enemies, 0 cultivation, a ruined house, an empty treasury, 5 girls who don't trust him, 1 cook, 1 journal, and an infinite number of points that can't be spent on power because power won't help him. Daniel put the kettle on. He poured 2 cups, 1 for himself. He left 1 on the table. 10 minutes later, Han Jeongok took the second one. She said to him in passing, "The fish at the market is fresh today." "Buy some," Daniel said. "Buy some. And meat and vegetables." Han Jeongok raised an eyebrow. "With what money?" Daniel took a small pouch out of the drawer, the last of the Seo family's money. He knew this from the body's memory. 320 gold pieces, his entire inheritance. Han Jeongok weighed the pouch in her palm. She shook her head. "That'll last 2 months if we scrimp." Daniel nodded. "Don't scrimp." She looked at him. He said, "In 2 months, I'll find the money. Right now, it's more important that everyone in this house eats properly." Han Jeongok snorted. "You're just like my late husband. He used to feed everyone first and worry about how to pay for it later, too." Daniel smiled wryly. "Just like him." Han Jeongok said, "He died happy and hungry." She left for the market. Daniel sat at the table and thought. Money, allies, protection. 3 things he didn't have and needed yesterday. He opened the system interface. He scanned the available parameters. Strength, useless. Dexterity, useless. Stamina, might come in handy, but not right now. Perception, already high. Voice, 5,000 invested, enough for now. Memory, already crammed with information. Thought speed, 5,000 invested, enough. There was one parameter left that he hadn't touched yet. It was called influence. Description, the ability to persuade. Not magic, not mind control, simply this. When you speak, people listen. When you suggest, people consider. When you ask, people think it over. Daniel invested 10,000 points. The world flickered. He didn't feel any difference, but he knew there was a difference. He stood up from the table. He went out into the yard. In the yard, Soyeon was already hauling stones, silently, methodically, stone by stone. She was sealing the first of 23 vulnerable points. Daniel took off his robe. He rolled up his sleeves. He walked over. He picked up a stone. They worked in silence for 2 hours. By lunchtime, the first point was covered. Soyeon looked at Daniel, at his raw palms, at the sweat on his face. She said nothing. But when Han Jeongok brought lunch out to the courtyard, Soyeon sat down next to Daniel at the shared table. Not across from him, beside, at arm's length. It was a distance she herself had determined. Daniel didn't move any closer. They ate in silence. Rice, fish, vegetables. Han Jeongok didn't skimp. From the window of the east wing, Jia watched them. She didn't come out, but the window was open, for the first time. That night, a hired assassin broke into the Seo residence. Daniel confronted him in the courtyard, unarmed, and talked him down using bluffing and hyperperception. Lee Soyeon was ready to intervene with her sword, and the next day, she set about fortifying the perimeter. Daniel discovered a new parameter in the influence system and invested 10,000 points in it. The Seo clan's funds were running out, and Daniel began thinking about finding resources and allies. The money ran out after 6 weeks, not 2 months as Han Jeongok had promised. Sooner, because Daniel wasn't spending it all on food. Medicine for oboki, mortar for the wall, fabric for clothes, because the 5 girls were still wearing the white robes of the condemned, and Daniel couldn't bear to look at them. He didn't tell them to change. He simply left 5 bundles of fabric by the door of the east wing. Plain, non-marking, dark colors. No embellishments. The next day, the white robes were hanging on a clothesline in the courtyard. washed, folded. No one wore them anymore. But the money had run out, and that became a problem. Daniel sat at a table in the main hall, staring at an empty pouch. The system didn't give out gold. The system gave out points. Points couldn't be exchanged for coins. Points couldn't be exchanged for anything except stats. He had to think. Daniel thought. With a thought speed of 10,000 units, he could run through options quickly. Option 1. Sell something from the Seo clan's property. He looked around the house. Nothing of value. The furniture was old. There were no decorations. The only asset of value was the land. But selling the clan's land would mean legally destroying the clan. Without land, there is no clan. Without a clan, there is no status. Without status, there is no guardianship over the girls. No. Option 2. Borrow from another clan. Ridiculous. No clan in Hiju would give money to a man hated by the 7 clans. Option 3. Earn money. Daniel settled on this option. Earn the money. But how? He's a lawyer. In a world where there are no courts in the usual sense, there are duels. There are temple arbitrations. There are clan proceedings. And there is one format he read about in the codex on the 3rd day and remembered. A commercial dispute. Article 192. When 2 merchants cannot agree on a contract, they hire a mediator. The mediator receives 10% of the transaction amount. The mediator must be of noble birth. Daniel is of noble birth. Impoverished, despised, but formally noble. He stood up from the table, got dressed, and left the house for the first time in 2 weeks. The northern hedge market was enormous. 3 squares, hundreds of stalls, thousands of people. Daniel walked through the rows and listened. With his perception set at 33,000 units, the market became a symphony of information. He could hear every conversation within a 50-step radius, every argument, every complaint, every curse. 20 minutes later, he found what he was looking for. 2 merchants were arguing with each other at the silk counter. The dispute was over a shipment of fabric. One claimed the shipment had been paid for. The other claimed it hadn't. Both were red in the face from shouting. A crowd had gathered around them. Daniel stepped forward. He stood between them. 10,000 units of influence took effect instantly. Both merchants fell silent, not because he ordered them to, but because when he stood between them, something about his presence made them both pause. Daniel said, "I am the heir to the Seo family. I am prepared to act as a mediator under Article 192, free of charge for the party that is found to be in the right. 10% from the party found to be in the wrong." Both merchants looked at him. One recognized him. That's the madman from the harvest. Daniel didn't argue with that assessment. He asked both of them to show their documents. Both produced scrolls. Daniel read them for 30 seconds. Memory and speed of thought did their job. He spotted the problem right away. The contract had been drafted with an error. The delivery date was specified according to the lunar calendar. The payment date was according to the solar calendar. The difference was 11 days. Both were right, both were wrong. Daniel explained. The merchants looked at each other, then at him. Then they shook hands. Daniel received his 10%, 80 gold pieces, for 30 seconds of work. He made 3 more deals before evening, 240 gold pieces. By sunset, he returned home with a full pouch and a list of 7 merchants who wanted to hire him for the following week. Han Jeongok looked at the money. She looked at Daniel. She said, "Did you rob someone?" Daniel replied, "Worse, I worked." She snorted and went to the kitchen to tally the budget. Daniel sat down at the table and made an entry in his journal. Income. First. Source. Trade brokerage. Amount. 320 gold pieces. Note. Every law in this world is poorly written. Every contract is riddled with errors. This isn't a bug. It's a source of income. The next day, Eunhae came to see Daniel for the first time. She stood at the door to his room in the West Wing and said nothing. Daniel waited. She remained silent for 2 minutes. Then she said, "I need medical scrolls." Daniel nodded. "Which ones exactly?" Eunhae said, "Herbal medicine of the southern coast, bone surgery, acupuncture of the internal meridians. They're not available in North Hedge. They have to be ordered from a trade caravan." Daniel asked, "How much?" Eunhae named the amount, 500 gold pieces. All of his earnings from yesterday, plus half again. Daniel said, "I'll order them tomorrow." Eunhae looked at him. She wanted to say something. He could tell by the subtle movement of her lips. 25,000 perception points. She wanted to ask why. She didn't ask. She turned and walked away. Daniel made a note in his journal. Pak Eunhae. Day 42. First contact on her own initiative. Inquiry. Professional, not personal. That's good. It means she's starting to think about the future. A person who thinks about the future is a person who has decided to live. 3 days later, Daniel earned another 700 gold pieces. Trade brokerage turned out to be a gold mine, literally. Contracts in Haeju were so poorly drafted that every other dispute could be resolved in a minute if you knew where to look. Daniel knew. 412 articles of the code, 700 amendments, the trade codes of the 3 regions, all in his head, all instantly accessible. He became well known on the market. Merchants called him Mediator Seo, some with respect, some with derision, but all with money. Daniel didn't take offense at the mockery. He took offense at poorly drafted contracts. It was a professional insult. On the 5th day of mediation, a man he hadn't expected approached him. An old man, about 60 years old. His clothes were expensive but understated. A ring on his right hand, the family seal. Daniel recognized the symbol. The Nam clan, one of the 7 clans. Not the strongest, not the weakest. Average. The old man said, "You are Seo Jaeho, the one." Daniel replied, "That depends on exactly which one you mean." The old man smiled. "The one who broke 5 chains and survived." Daniel said, "That one, yes." The old man sat down next to him on a bench by the fountain. He introduced himself. Nam Gi-hyun, head of the Nam clan's Chamber of Commerce. 3rd son, not the heir, not a warrior, a merchant. He said, "I have a problem that no mediator in Haeju can solve. A contract with the southern port, 200,000 gold pieces. The dispute has been going on for 3 years. The temple arbitration has reached an impasse. Both sides have lost more in legal fees than the contract itself is worth. I need someone who can look at this with a fresh perspective." Daniel asked, "Why me?" Nam Gi-hyun looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Because I saw how you resolved the dispute between Cho and Park in 30 seconds. My mediator struggled with it for 2 weeks. You found an error in the calendar that they didn't even notice. You're either a genius or you have a gift. Either way, it works for me," Daniel said. "Show me the documents." Nam Gi-hyun handed him a bundle of scrolls, 7 of them, thick ones. Daniel read them for an hour. Sitting on a bench by the fountain, Nam Gi-hyun waited, patiently. An hour later, Daniel said, "I found it." Nam Gi-hyun raised an eyebrow. Daniel explained, "The contract refers to the Southern Hedge Trade Code, but the port is technically on the border between Southern and Eastern Hedge, a difference of 3 miles. If the Eastern Hajo Code is applied, the obligations are distributed differently. Your side owes not 200,000, but 120. Their side must compensate for the difference because they were the ones who chose the port on the border, knowing about the jurisdictional ambiguity. This is called the doctrine of informed choice, Article 73 of the Eastern Code." Nam Gi-hyun looked at him. He was silent. Then he said, "You just saved my family 80,000 gold pieces." Daniel replied, 10% of the savings. That's my fee. 8,000. Nam Gi-hyun laughed, for the first time during the entire conversation. He said, "You're selling yourself short. I'll pay 12, and I have 4 more contracts." Daniel nodded. "Send them over." They shook hands. Nam Gi-hyun left. Daniel sat on a bench and did the math. 12,000 gold pieces, plus 4 contracts. If each one brings in at least 5,000, in a month, the Seo household will have a treasury. A real treasury. For the first time in decades. The system flashed. 14,000 points. Trial class. Economic. Bonus. The first ally from the 7 clans. Daniel stored everything in his memory. Now he knew the trade codes of all 5 regions of Jeju. All 5. With all the precedents. He walked home, lost in thought. Nam Gi-hyun isn't just a client. He is the 3rd son of the Nam family, not the heir. A merchant. A man whom his own family considers secondary. People like that understand what it means to be underestimated. People like that are the most reliable allies, because they have something to prove. That evening, Daniel returned home. He put the money in the drawer. He went out into the courtyard. Soyeon was finishing the 17th of 23 sections. The wall on the south side had already been completely restored. Daniel stopped beside her. He looked at the masonry. Even, neat, military style. Soyeon said without turning around, "You smell like the market." Daniel replied, "I was making money." She turned around, looked up at him. She was crouching by the wall. Her hands were in the mortar. Her face was covered in dust. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She said, "Money is good. Money means walls and food and medicine. But money won't stop the next killer." Daniel nodded. "I know." She said, "I need a real sword. Not a stick. A sword." Daniel looked at her. A warrior of the 3rd Lotus. 10 times stronger than him, disarmed at the harvest, brought to her knees. And here she is, a month and a half later, building a wall, asking for a sword, not for revenge, for protection. Daniel said, "Tomorrow." She nodded. She went back to her masonry work. Daniel went to his room. He wrote in his journal. Day 45. Financial stability achieved. First potential ally among the 7 clans. Nam Gi-hyung, the Nam clan, Chamber of Commerce. Motivation, economic and personal. Soyeon requested a weapon, ready to take on the role of head of security. The Seo residence is ceasing to be a refuge and is beginning to become something else. What exactly? I don't know yet. The Seo clan's funds have run out, and Daniel has started earning money by acting as a trade intermediary in the market, using his legal knowledge and the system's parameters. He found his first potential ally among the 7 clans, Nam Gi-hyung from the Nam clan's Chamber of Commerce. Eunhae came to him on her own for the first time with a professional request. Soyeon asked for a real sword to protect her home. Daniel bought the sword the next day, not at the market. The market sold ceremonial weapons for aristocrats. Beautiful, useless. Daniel found a blacksmith on the outskirts of town, an old man with scorched hands and a workshop the size of a storage closet. He forged knives for butchers and sickles for peasants. Daniel said he needed a combat sword, short, light, for a man who would use it every day. The blacksmith looked at Daniel, at his slender hands, at his scholarly bearing. He said, "Not for you." Daniel replied, "Not for me." The blacksmith nodded. "It'll be ready in 3 days. 400 gold pieces." Daniel paid. 3 days later, the sword was ready. Simple, unadorned, good steel, well balanced. Daniel brought it home and placed it on the table in the main hall. He called for Soyeon. She came in. She saw the sword. She stopped. She stood there looking at it for about 20 seconds. Then she walked over. She picked it up. Her hand gripped the hilt, and Daniel saw her whole body change. Her shoulders squared differently. Her back straightened differently. Her legs spread wider. It was the body of a warrior that had remembered it was a warrior's body. Soyeon made 3 movements, quick, precise. The air whistled. Daniel didn't even have time to blink. The third lotus of cultivation. He had read about it in the codex. The speed of a third lotus warrior's movements exceeds that of an ordinary person 5-fold. Strength, 10-fold. Endurance, 7-fold. Soyeon stopped. She looked at the sword, then at Daniel. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were wet for a single second, then dry. She nodded. She sheathed the sword at her waist. She left. Daniel didn't record this in his journal. Some things aren't meant for the journal. That same day, Ha-in came to see him, a dancer. She came into the main hall and sat across from him. It was their first private meeting. Before that, Ha-in had only spoken with Han Jeongok in the kitchen. Ha-in was different from the others. She didn't stay silent. She didn't avert her gaze. She didn't cower. She sat up straight and looked Daniel straight in the eye. And she spoke. She said, "I want to understand what you're doing." Daniel asked, "What do you mean?" Hyun said, "You broke the chains. You gave us locks. You hired a doctor. You bought clothes. You earned money. You bought a sword for Soyeon. You're spending time, money, and energy on 5 women you don't even know. And you're asking for nothing in return. Nothing. That's impossible. People don't do that. Men don't do that. So you must be expecting something. And I want to know what, right now, without any polite words." Daniel looked at her. Ha-in wasn't afraid. It wasn't fear. It was rage. Quiet, controlled. The rage of someone who had lived for 23 years in a world where every gift had to be paid for with her body. Daniel replied, "I'm a lawyer. In my world, where I came from, for 6 years I worked on the same kind of cases. I helped women get out of situations like yours. Forced marriages, human trafficking. Forced marriage. That was my job. I did it for a salary. There's no salary here. But the work is the same." Han looked at him. She didn't believe him. It was obvious. 25,000 perception points. A slight tension in her jaw, narrowed pupils, her fingers clenched under the table. She didn't believe a single word. Daniel said, "You don't have to believe me. Not at all, ever. You can think I'm lying for the rest of your life, and that's your right. The only thing I can offer is time. In a year, you'll know the truth. Not because I'll tell you, because you'll see it." Han was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said, "I'm a dancer. I was. Before the harvest, I danced in the temple courtyard. For the priests. They watched." Daniel nodded. She continued, "I wasn't allowed to dance for myself. Only for them. Only when they wanted me to. Only the way they wanted me to. My body was an instrument. Not mine. Theirs." Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod too often. He didn't put on a sympathetic face. He just listened. Another habit from a past life. Clients hated it when a lawyer put on a sympathetic face. They wanted to be heard, not pitied. Ha-in said, "If you want to do something for me, I want an empty room, no windows, with a mirror. I'll be the only one with the key." Daniel said, "There's a room in the south wing, the Seo family's former training hall. There are no mirror, but I'll have one installed. I'll board up the windows. There will be only one key. Yours. Ha-in stood up. She looked at him one more time. She said, "If you're lying, I'll be the first to know." Daniel replied, "I know." She left. Daniel wrote in his journal, Kim Ha-in, day 48. First direct conversation. Request, private space for dancing. Emotional state, controlled rage. Doesn't trust me. That's normal. That's right. Trust that comes quickly leaves even faster. Daniel ordered the mirror that same day, a large, full-length one. It was delivered a week later. Hyan took the key to the South Hall and didn't leave until evening. Daniel didn't check on her. He didn't eavesdrop. He didn't peek in. Han Jeongok brought her dinner to the hall door. The bowl stood untouched until nightfall. Then it disappeared. 2 days later, Daniel was walking past the south wing late at night when he heard a sound. Quiet, rhythmic. Footsteps on the wooden floor. Quick, light. Then a pause. Then again. Hyan was dancing, alone, in the closed hall, without an audience. For the first time in her life, just for herself. Daniel didn't stop. He walked past. But he heard something else, between the footsteps, between the beats of her bare feet on the wood. A sound that perception amplified to complete clarity. She was crying, dancing and crying at the same time. Daniel quickened his pace. He left. There are things not meant for strangers' ears, not even for the ears of the one who gave him the key. The next 2 weeks were routine. Daniel worked at the market. Brokerage brought in a steady income. Nam Gi-hyun sent him 4 contracts. Daniel completed all 4. Total earnings, 30,000 gold pieces in 2 weeks. The Seo clan, once the poorest in northern Haeju, was now, well, not rich, but financially secure. Daniel hired 2 builders. He repaired the roof of the west wing. He ordered medical scrolls for Eunhae from the southern caravan. He bought educational scrolls for Jia, basic literacy, arithmetic, calligraphy. In the evenings, he taught Jia himself. They sat at a table in the main hall. A candle, ink, a brush, a scroll. Daniel wrote a character. Jia copied it. Her hands trembled. The lines came out crooked. She gripped the brush so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Daniel didn't correct her hand. He didn't touch her. He just wrote beside her. He showed her. He waited. On the 3rd evening, Jia wrote her first character correctly. Her name, Jia. She stared at it for a minute, at the 2 black marks on the white scroll. Then she looked up at Daniel and smiled. For the first time ever, a small smile. Timid, like a sprout that had broken through a rock and isn't sure if it'll be allowed to grow. Daniel smiled back. The system flashed. 5,000 points. He didn't look at them. He was looking at Jia, who was looking at her name. In his 2nd month of life in this world, Daniel Seo began to understand one thing. Endless points weren't his main weapon. The journal wasn't his main weapon. Legal knowledge wasn't his main weapon. His main weapon was the 6 rooms in the East Wing. Or rather, 5. Or rather, the people in those rooms, because each of them was something more than just a victim. Sonmi was an heiress, a leader, a strategist. Eunhae was a doctor, the only qualified medical professional within a 50-mile radius. Ha-in was an artist with a temple education and knowledge of rituals. Soyeon was a warrior of the 3rd Lotus, a captain, a commander. Jia was nothing yet, but she had eyes that saw everything and a memory that remembered everything. And she learned faster than anyone Daniel had ever met in either of his lives. Seo's house wasn't just a refuge. Seo's house was a team. They just didn't know it yet. Daniel bought Soyeon a battle sword, and she returned to her form as a warrior of the 3rd Lotus. Ha-in spoke openly with Daniel for the first time and asked for a dance hall. She began dancing alone for the first time in her life, just for herself. Daniel continued to earn a living as a mediator and began teaching Gia to read and write. Gia wrote her name and smiled for the first time. Daniel realized that Seo's house was not a refuge, but a team. The third month began with a challenge to a duel. The scroll was delivered by a courier in the red robes of the Hwang clan. Official challenge: the clan's seal, the heir's signature. Hwang Daejeon, 23 years old, a warrior of the fourth lotus, the eldest son of the head of the Hwang clan, Sonmi's brother, the very man for whom her father had sold his daughter into the harvest. The challenge was drafted flawlessly. Daniel read it 3 times, not a single legal error. Someone had helped Hwang Daejeon draft this document. Someone clever. Daniel placed the scroll on the table. He thought for a moment. A duel in Haeju does not necessarily mean a sword fight. The code allows for 4 forms: a duel with weapons, a duel through cultivation, a contest of words, a contest of evidence. The first 2 would mean death for Daniel. The fourth, lotus cultivation versus zero cultivation. Not even Soyeon with a sword would be able to intervene. A one-on-one duel, no seconds, no help. But the third and fourth options? A duel by words is a public debate. Both sides present their arguments. The audience votes. The loser loses their rank. A duel by evidence is a presentation of facts. Whoever presents the more compelling evidence of their case wins. The loser loses their status. Daniel thought for 6 hours. Then he called for Sonmi. She came. She read the challenge. Her expression didn't change. But Daniel saw it, a micro movement of her jaw. She clenched her teeth so hard that her cheekbones turned white. It was her brother, the one for whom she had been sold. Daniel said, "I'll accept the challenge. Form 3, a duel of words." Sonmi looked at him. She said, "He'll kill you." Daniel shook his head. "Not in a duel of words. In a duel of words, you don't kill with a sword. You kill with the truth." Sonmi was silent. Daniel said, "I need your help." She raised an eyebrow. Daniel said, "You know your family better than anyone. You were the heiress. You've seen the documents. You know what your father did and didn't do. I need facts, specific ones, with dates." Sonmi looked at him. 10 seconds. 20. Then she said, "You're asking me to destroy my father." Daniel replied, "No, I'm asking you to tell the truth about your father. He'll destroy himself if there's anything left to destroy." Sonmi remained silent for another 30 seconds. Then she sat down at the table. She picked up a brush and began to write. She wrote for 4 hours, without a break. Daniel sat nearby and didn't interfere. When she finished, 3 scrolls lay on the table. 17 violations of the single chain code committed by the Hwan clan over the past 12 years. 3 illegal harvests where captives were taken not by right of victory, but to settle debts. 2 instances where the chain was activated on girls under the age of 15, which is forbidden even by the code. 1 instance where the chain was activated on a boy. This was a violation that no one had ever spoken of aloud. Daniel read it. His face was like a mask. Inside, everything was burning. But the mask remained. He said, "That's enough." Sonmi said, "That's enough to destroy not only my father, that's enough to destroy the entire Hwan clan." Daniel shook his head. "No, I don't need to destroy the entire clan. I need to win a duel against one person, your brother. I'll leave the rest for another day. Sonmi looked at him. For the first time in 3 months, there was something other than coldness in her eyes, something resembling respect or surprise. She said, "Why not do it all at once?" Daniel replied, "Because if I use everything now, I won't have any trump cards left for later. A good lawyer never plays all his cards in a single hand." Sonmi smiled for the first time, a small smile, almost imperceptible, but the first. She said, "You're thinking 3 years ahead." Daniel replied, "At least 3. The day of the duel was set for a week later. North Assembly Square, a public event, spectators from all over the city. Daniel prepared every evening, not physically, mentally. He reviewed the facts. He structured his arguments. He thought through every possible response Hwan Dae-jun might give, every objection, every attempt to change the subject. A thought speed of 10,000 units allowed him to run through hundreds of scenarios in his head per hour. He found the optimal one. Not the most aggressive, not the most gentle, the optimal one. The one in which Hwang Dae-jun would destroy himself without Daniel's help. All he had to do was ask the right questions. On the day of the duel, Daniel got up before dawn. He put on a simple robe. No family insignia, no adornments. Barefoot. He went out into the courtyard. Soyeon was standing by the gate with a sword. Hayoung was sitting on the steps. Eunhae was standing by the wall with a medical bag. Jia was peering out the window. Sonmi stood in the doorway of the main hall. Daniel looked at them. They had all come. Not because he had asked them to. He hadn't asked. They had come on their own. Daniel nodded. He walked toward the gate. Soyeon followed him. He stopped. "You don't have to come with me," he said. Soyeon replied, "I don't have to, but I'm coming." He didn't argue. The North Assembly Square was packed with people. 3,000 spectators, maybe more. News of the duel between the madman of the Seo clan and the heir to the Hwan clan had spread throughout the city in a single day. In the center of the square was a stone circle, 20 paces in diameter. Hwan Tae-jung was already standing inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the armor of the fourth lotus, a sword at his belt. His face was handsome and haughty, the face of a man who had gotten everything he wanted his entire life. Standing beside him was the priest referee, an old man in white, not the one who led the harvest, another. The priest announced, "A verbal duel, challenged by Hwang Dae-jun. The respondent, Seo Jaeho. The rules. Each side presents its position. The audience votes by a show of hands. The loser drops 1 cultivation rank." Daniel stepped into the circle, barefoot, unarmed, facing a warrior in full armor. The crowd stirred. Someone laughed. Hwang Dae-jun looked down at Daniel. He was a head taller, twice as broad-shouldered. He said, "I challenged you because you stole my clan's property, the 5 chains belonging to the House of Hwang. You violated the code and brought shame upon my family." Daniel replied, quietly, calmly, 10,000 units of influence in every word. "Your family signed a document recognizing these women's free status, voluntarily, in front of witnesses. Your ambassador confirmed this with the Hwan clan's seal. You're challenging me to a duel over something your own clan has recognized as lawful." Hwan Dae-jun flushed. The ambassador acted without authority. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Without authority? The Hwan clan's ambassador, with the Hwan clan's seal, on an official mission on behalf of the Hwang clan. He acted without authority. That means one of 2 things. Either your father sent the ambassador without authority, which is a violation of protocol under Article 48, or your father sent the ambassador with authority and is now renouncing his own decision, which is a violation of honor under Article 51. Which option will the Hwan clan choose? Silence. 3,000 people were silent. Hwan Tae-jun opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Daniel didn't let him answer. He continued. But that's not the point. Here's the main point. The Hwan heir has challenged me to a duel for insulting the clan's honor. Let's talk about the Hwan clan's honor. Daniel took out a single scroll. 1, not 3. He chose the most damning fact out of 17. 1. He unrolled the scroll. He read it aloud. On the 7th day of the 3rd month of the 211th year of the Sleeping Dragon era, the Hwan clan activated the chain on a captive named Moon Dayeon. The captive's age at the time of activation, 13 years old. The One Chain Codex, Article 22. The minimum age for activation, 15 years. The violation is confirmed by temple records. Person responsible, head of the Hwan clan, Hwan Chang-min, the father of the heir standing before me. The square fell silent. Hwan Tae-jun turned pale. Daniel rolled up the scroll. He said quietly, I can continue, I have more, but I think this is enough. The Hwan heir wants to speak of honor. Let him first explain how his father placed the chain on a 13-year-old girl. Hwan Tae-jun was silent. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. He grabbed his sword. The priest arbitrator stepped forward. He said, A duel of words. Weapons are forbidden. Heir Hwan, your answer. Hwan Tae-jun stood with his hand on his sword. 10 seconds. 20. Then he withdrew his hand. He said, I didn't know about this. Daniel replied, That doesn't change the fact. Your family has violated the code you swear to uphold. You challenged me to a duel for dishonor, but the dishonor is not in my house. It is in yours. The priest turned to the crowd. Vote. Who is in favor of Hwan Tae-jun's position? Silence. Not a single hand. Who supports Seo Jaehyun's position? 3,000 hands. The priest announced, The duel is over. The winner? Seo Jaehyun. Hwan Tae-jun is demoted 1 rank from the 4th lotus to the 3rd. Hwan Tae-jun stood in the center of the circle, alone, publicly demoted, publicly humiliated, not by the sword, by the word, by a single scroll, by a single fact. Daniel stepped out of the circle. Soyeon was waiting for him behind the line. She looked at him. She said, You used only 1 fact out of 17. Daniel nodded. The remaining 16 would come the next day. The system flashed. 25,000 points. Trial class. Public. Non-violent. Bonus. Opponent's rank demoted without a fight. Additionally, reputation in North Hedge increased by 200%. Daniel walked home through the crowd. People parted. They watched. They whispered. The name Seo Jaehyun was on everyone's lips. Daniel wasn't listening. He was thinking about Hwan Tae-jun, about the look on his face when he heard about the 13-year-old girl. He really didn't know. Daniel had seen it. 33,000 perception points left no room for doubt. Hwan Tae-jun didn't know what his father had done. And now he knew. And that truth would destroy him from within. Daniel felt no sense of victory. He felt exhaustion. Hwan Tae-jun challenged Daniel to a duel. Daniel chose a verbal duel and, using the facts provided by Sonmi, publicly exposed the Hwang clan's violation of the code. Hwan Tae-jun was demoted from the 4th to the 3rd lotus. Daniel used only 1 fact out of 17, keeping the rest to himself. All 5 girls came to see him off to the duel on their own initiative. After the duel, everything changed, and not for the better. The Hwang clan lost face publicly. The heir had been demoted. The story of the 13-year-old girl spread throughout North Haje in 2 days. The final and flyers at the market retold the story, embellishing it more and more with each passing day. In one version, Daniel summoned lightning from the sky. In another, he made Hwang Tae-jun cry on his knees. The truth was more boring and more terrifying. The truth was a single scroll and silence. But the Hwang clan was not going to take it lying down. On the second day after the duel, it was not an ambassador who arrived at the gates of the Seo residence, nor was it an assassin. A scroll arrived, an official one, bearing the seal of the Council of the Seven Clans. Daniel unrolled it. He read it. He reread it. He placed it on the table. He sat down. He thought. The scroll read, "The Council of the Seven Clans is initiating an investigation into the Seo clan on charges of violating the One Chain Code, Article 1, the unlawful seizure of 5 chains. Until the investigation is complete, the Seo heir is forbidden to leave the city. All persons under his care must be brought in for questioning at the Temple of the Black Lotus within 7 days." Daniel reread the last line once more. All persons under his care must be brought in for questioning. They wanted to take the girls away. Not physically, legally. An interrogation at the Temple of the Black Lotus is not a conversation. It is the ritual of truth. A jade collar around the neck. The priest's questions. The collar detects lies. Sounds fair. But Daniel had read about the ritual of truth in the Codex, Article 271, a note in small print. Those who undergo the ritual of truth are placed under the temple's temporary custody for the duration of the investigation. Temporary custody of the temple. It's another cage, with a different lock, but a cage nonetheless. Daniel called everyone together. For the first time, in 3 months, he had never once gathered everyone together. There had been no need, no readiness. But now there was a need. They came. Sonmi sat down at the table first. Her back was straight, her face was stony. Soyeon stood by the wall, her hand on her sword. Eunhae sat in the corner, quiet, attentive. Ha-in sat next to Sonmi. Jia was the last to arrive. She stood by the door, ready to leave at any moment. Han Jeongok brought tea and remained standing by the kitchen. Daniel placed the scroll on the table. He said, "The council wants the 5 of you to appear for questioning at the Black Lotus Temple, the ritual of truth, the Jade Circlet. I won't lie to you. If you go there, they won't let you leave. The temple's custody means you'll live in the temple until the investigation is over, and the investigation can last as long as the council wants. Years. A lifetime." Silence. Ha-in spoke first. "So, we're someone's property again. Just the temples, not the clans," Daniel replied. "No, because you won't go there." 5 pairs of eyes stared at him. Daniel said, "Article 271 provides for the interrogation of individuals under guardianship. But Article 18 defines guardianship. Guardianship requires the guardian's consent. I am your guardian according to a document signed by the Hwang clan. I do not consent to the interrogation. Without my consent, the interrogation is illegal. Without an interrogation, the investigation is at a standstill. The council can apply pressure. The council can make threats. But the council cannot violate its own code. Because if the council violates the code, every clan in Haeju will have a precedent. If the council can violate the code for the sake of a single investigation, then the council can violate the code for anything. And then the code ceases to be law. It becomes a recommendation. And no clan will allow that." Soyeon said, "They'll send soldiers." Daniel nodded. "Perhaps." Soyeon said, "How many?" Daniel replied, "I don't know, but we have the wall you repaired, the sword, and me." Soyeon looked at him. "You're not a weapon," she said. Daniel replied, "No, I'm a lawyer. That's worse." Haynes snorted. It was the first time anyone in that house had laughed at his joke. Daniel wrote his response to the council that same evening. 3 scrolls. The first, an official refusal to be interrogated under Article 18. The second, a counter-complaint regarding procedural violations. The investigation was initiated without notifying the defendant 30 days in advance, as required by Article 103. Notice period, 2 days. Violation. Third, a request for a public hearing. Article 410. Any family facing charges from the council has the right to a public hearing in the presence of representatives from all 7 clans. Daniel knew that the third scroll was the main blow. A public hearing means an audience. An audience means the council won't be able to act quietly. Every decision would be out in the open. Every procedural violation would be recorded. The council did not want publicity. The council wanted to quietly take the girls away and close the case. Daniel did not give them their silence. He sent all 3 scrolls by the morning courier and copies to Nam Gi-hyun, just in case. 3 days later, a reply arrived. The council had accepted the request for a public hearing. Date, in 2 months. Location, the Northern Assembly Hall. 2 months. Daniel sat at his desk and thought, 2 months is a long time. 2 months is a lifetime. In 2 months, he could prepare a defense so strong that the council would regret every scroll it had sent. Daniel took out a notebook. He opened a blank page. He wrote the title, Plan. Point 1. Compile all violations of the code by all 7 clans over the past 20 years. Point 2. Find witnesses. Point 3. Find Moon Dayeon, the 13-year-old girl who was forced to wear the chain. She's 16 now, if she's still alive. Point 4. Find the others. Daniel closed the notebook. He looked out the window. In the courtyard, Soyeon was practicing with her sword. Her movements were faster than they had been 3 months ago. She was recovering. Jia sat nearby on the steps, watching. She held a scroll with hieroglyphs in her hands, a training scroll. But her eyes were on Soyeon, on the sword, on the movements. Daniel noticed and made a mental note. Jia wants to learn more than just literacy. That evening, Daniel sat in his room and worked with the system's interface. He invested 10,000 points into a new parameter he had just discovered. The parameter was called network. Description: the ability to track people, not magically, through information. The higher the parameter, the faster you find out who is where, through rumors, through merchants, through casual conversations. The world itself brings you information. Daniel invested 10,000. The world flickered. And the next morning, Han Jeongok returned from the market and mentioned in passing, "People at the market are saying that a girl has been living in the Eastern Quarter, hiding from the Hwang clan for 3 years now. She's young, about 16. Her name is Moon." Daniel set his cup aside. Moon Da-yeon, Article 22. A 13-year-old girl who is now 16, who's in hiding, who's alive. The network parameter was working. The Council of 7 Clans launched an investigation against the Seo clan and demanded that the girls be interrogated at the Black Lotus Temple. Daniel legally blocked the interrogation and secured public hearings 2 months later. For the first time, he gathered all the girls together and explained the situation openly. Daniel discovered a new parameter of the network system and, through it, learned the whereabouts of Moon Dayeon, the girl on whom the Hwang clan had illegally placed the chain when she was 13. Daniel found Moon Dayeon on the third day of his search, the eastern quarter, the lower rows, a district where those whom the city tried to ignore lived: laundresses, day laborers, runaway servants, people without a clan or a seal. Daniel walked through the narrow streets in plain clothes, without clan insignia, without an entourage. Soyeon followed him at a distance of 30 paces. He didn't ask. She didn't ask for permission. She just walked. After the incident with the murderer, she wouldn't let him leave the house alone. Daniel didn't argue. The house where Moon Dayeon was hiding wasn't really a house. It was a crevice between two stone walls, a roof of rags, a door of planks. Daniel stopped. His intuition told him there was one person inside, small, lightweight, breathing rapidly. She could hear him. She was afraid. Daniel didn't knock. He sat down on the ground across from the door, 5 steps away. He pulled a bundle out of his bag, rice and fish that Han Jeongok had packed for him. He placed the bundle halfway between himself and the door, sat back down, and waited. Soyeon stood around the corner, silent. 20 minutes later, the door opened a crack, a slit. One eye. Dark. Huge. Frightened. Daniel said, "My name is Seo Jaeho. I'm not from the Hwan clan. I'm not from the temple. I'm not from the council. Food for you. I'll wait." The eye stared at him for 30 seconds. Then the door closed. Then it opened again. A slender hand, quick, it snatched the package. The door slammed shut. Daniel waited. 5 minutes later, he heard her eating. Quickly, hungrily, like someone who hadn't eaten in 2 days. Maybe 3. When the sounds of eating subsided, Daniel said, "I know what the Hwan clan did to you. I know you were 13. Silence. He continued, "3 days ago, I defeated the Hwan heir in a public duel. I used your case as evidence. The whole city knows. The Hwan clan has lost face." Silence. Then a voice. Quiet. Hoarse. Like that of someone who hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. She said, "Why are you here?" Daniel replied. "Because in 2 months, there will be a public hearing. The Council of the 7 Clans versus the Seo clan. I need a witness. You." Silence. She said, "You want me to stand before the council and tell my story?" Daniel replied, "I want to offer you a choice. You can testify, or you can choose not to. It's your decision. But before you decide, I want to offer you something else. A roof, walls, food, a lock on the door. I have a house. 5 women live there, women I took from the harvest. They're free. Each has her own room, her own key. No one enters without permission. If you want, you can live there. No strings attached, no obligations. Whether you testify or not is a separate matter, and it has nothing to do with having a roof over your head." Silence. A long one. A minute. 2. 3. The door opened. Moon Dayeon stood in the doorway, 16 years old, thin, dirty. Her clothes were torn. Her eyes were huge. A thin white line on her neck, a mark left by a jade headband. 3 years had passed, but the mark remained. Daniel stood up, slowly, so as not to scare her. She looked up at him. She was small. Daniel wasn't tall in this body, but she came up to his shoulder. She said, "If this is a trap, I'll run away. I know how to hide. I've been hiding for 3 years." Daniel replied, "This isn't a trap. But you're right not to believe me. I wouldn't believe it either." She looked at him for another 10 seconds. Then she nodded. They walked towards Seo's house in silence. Moon Dayeon walked 10 paces behind them. Soyeon walked even further back. 3 people, 3 distances, 3 levels of trust. At the gate to Seo's house, Dayeon stopped. She looked at the walls, at the masonry Soyeon had repaired, at the clean courtyard, at the open windows of the east wing. The smell of rice and fish wafted from the kitchen. Han Jeongok was cooking lunch. Dayeon stood there, breathing in that scent. A minute, 2. Then she went inside. Daniel showed her to the 6th room, the east wing, next to Jia, a lock, a key, just like everyone else. Dayeon took the key. She looked at it, turned it over in her hands. Then she looked at Daniel. She said, "I will testify." Daniel shook his head. "Not now. Decide in a month."
When you've slept, eaten, and realized that the door locks from the inside. She opened her mouth, closed it, nodded, went into the room. The bolt clicked. Daniel stood in the hallway. 6 closed doors, 6 bolts, 6 girls behind them, 6 stories that might never be told. The system flashed. 10,000 points. Trial class. Human. Bonus. Shelter expansion. That evening, Daniel sat in the main hall working on a plan for the hearings. The door opened. Sonmi walked in, without knocking. For the first time, she'd always knocked before, or waited at the door. Now she walked in and sat across from him, as an equal. Daniel looked up. Sonmi said, "I need to tell you something." Daniel set down his brush. She said, "I'm not just the heir to the Hwang clan. Before the harvest, I worked in my father's office for a year. I handled his correspondence. I know of more than just the 17 violations committed by the Hwang clan. I know of violations committed by 4 other clans of the 7 clans, because my father corresponded with them. They were covering for each other for years." Daniel looked at her. Sonmi pulled a bundle of thin papers from her sleeve. She placed them on the table. 30 sheets, tiny handwriting, dates, names, amounts, itineraries. This wasn't just information. It was correspondence between the heads of the 4 clans. Sonmi said, "I kept copies. When I found out my father was selling me, I thought it would be my tool for revenge. Now it's your tool." Daniel looked at the papers, then at her. He said, "Not mine. Ours." Sonmi blinked. Once. It was her only display of emotion. Then she nodded. She said, "Ours." They worked until dawn, sifting through the correspondence and organizing it. Names in one column, dates in another, violations in a third. By morning, a map of corruption within 4 of the 7 clans lay on the table. Not 17 violations, 123. Illegal harvests, counterfeit chains, captives sold to neighboring continents, money from the sale of people used to fund armies, supply chains, routes, middlemen. Daniel sat in front of this map and felt the back of his neck grow cold. This wasn't an investigation. It was a bomb. Documentary, legal, precise. If this landed on the table at the public hearings, it wouldn't be just 4 clans that would collapse. The entire council would collapse. Sonmi sat beside him. She was drinking tea. Her face was calm. Her back was straight. She had been waiting for this moment ever since the day her father told her she was going to the harvest. 3 years. She had waited 3 years with copies of letters sewn into the hem of her dress. Daniel looked at her. He said, "You're a dangerous person, Hwan Sonmi." She replied, "I know." He smiled. She smiled. It was the first time they had smiled at each other. That morning, Daniel wrote in his log, Day 93, received documents regarding violations by 4 of the 7 clans. Source, Hwang Sonmi. Threat level to the Seo house, critical.
Threat level to the Council of Seven Clans? Catastrophic. Until the public hearings? 54 days. Daniel found Moon Dayeon and brought her to the Seo house, the sixth girl under his care. For the first time, Sonmi came to him on her own and handed over copies of correspondence between the four clan leaders containing 123 documented violations of the code. Together, they mapped out the council's corruption. 54 days remain until the public hearings. A month before the hearings, the seventh woman arrived at the Seo house. Not a fugitive, not a captive. A woman in travel clothes with a bag slung over her shoulder and ink stains on her fingers. She identified herself. Jong Mier, 25 years old, a chronicler, a former one. Dismissed from the Northern Hagio Scrolls office for an article about the Seo house. An article that no one published, but everyone read, because handwritten copies had spread throughout the market in 3 days. Mier stood at the gate and spoke. I am not asking for asylum. I am not asking for protection. I am asking for access. Your story must be told correctly. Otherwise, others will tell it for you, and they will lie. I want to be your official chronicler. Dae looked at her. Perception at 33,000. Pulse steady. Pupils normal. Hands calm. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't lying. She was a professional who had come to do her job. Daniel said, Do you have a place to stay? Mier replied, No, I was evicted from my room at the council office. Daniel said, There's a vacant room in the West Wing, next to mine, not in the East Wing. The West Wing is for those who work. Mier raised an eyebrow. Work? Daniel nodded. I have a public hearing in a month. I need someone who can take notes quickly and accurately. Someone who knows how the council's office works. Someone who knows which scribes take bribes. Someone who knows which scrolls go missing on their way to the temple archives. Meyer looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she said, You were testing me. Daniel replied, Network parameter. I knew about your article even before it made the rounds in the market. I knew you'd be fired. I was waiting for you to come. Meyer entered Seo's house that same day. She didn't ask for a lock. She asked for a table, paper, ink, and access to Daniel's journal. Daniel gave her everything except the journal. For now. The journal is too dangerous. Meyer wasn't offended. She said, That's right. Trust doesn't come on the first day. I'll start by taking statements from each of the 6, if they agree. Daniel said, Ask them, not me. Meyer nodded. She worked quickly. In 3 days, she spoke with each of them. Not an interrogation, not an interview, a conversation. Over tea, at work, while walking around the courtyard. Meyer knew how to listen so well that people told her things they hadn't intended to say. It was a talent, or a skill, or both. A week later, she had a manuscript, 30 pages, 6 stories. No names yet, no dates, just voices. Women talking about what had been done to them, in their own words, unvarnished, without self-pity, just the truth. Daniel read the manuscript that night, alone, in his room. He knew all these stories. He'd heard fragments of them over the past 4 months. But gathered together in a single voice, they hit him so hard that he put the scroll down and sat motionless for 10 minutes, staring at the wall. Then he went back to work, because work doesn't wait. Preparations for the hearings were underway every day. Daniel and Sonmi worked together every evening. She turned out to be more than just an informant. She turned out to be a strategist. Her mind worked like clockwork, precise, cool, flawless. She saw moves that Daniel didn't notice, political ones, clan-based ones, internal connections that a lawyer from another world couldn't possibly know. They complemented each other, his legal logic and her inside knowledge of the system. Daniel would draft arguments, Sonmi would find the weak spots in them. He would rewrite them. She would check them over and over again, every night until dawn. In the third week of preparation, Nam Gi-hyun came to see Daniel, not with a contract, with a warning. They sat in the courtyard. Tea, spring sunshine. Nam Gi-hyun said, "The council knows about Sunmi's documents. They don't know the contents, but they know they exist. One of your 6 is talking, or someone is watching your house." Daniel nodded. "I know." Nam Gi-hyun raised an eyebrow. Daniel said, "The house has been under surveillance since the 3rd day. 2 of them. During the day, one on the roof across the street. At night, a second one at the east gate. I can see them. 33,000 perceptions. I can hear them breathing through the wall." Nam Gi-hyun paused. Then he said, "You're a dangerous man." "So, Jaehyun," Daniel replied. "I've been told that before." Nam Gi-hyun said, "The council won't let you speak. They're preparing something. I don't know what. But my source at the Black Lotus Temple said one word. Sealing." Daniel froze. Sealing. He knew that term. Article 399. Sealing of a clan. The ultimate measure. The entire clan is declared non-existent. All clan members lose their status. All clan documents are annulled. All individuals under the clan's guardianship are transferred to the council's guardianship. This meant the end. Not a duel, not a trial, just the end. A single scroll with 7 seals, and the Seo clan is no more. And all the girls return to where they came from. Daniel sat in silence. He thought. His mind, racing at 10,000, ran through the possibilities. Sealing requires a unanimous decision by the council. 7 out of 7. If even one clan is against it, sealing is impossible. Nam Gi-hyun, the Nam clan. 1 vote. Daniel looked at him. Nam Gi-hyun looked back. He understood. Daniel said, "I need your vote." Nam Gi-hyun was silent for 10 seconds. Then he said, "My vote is the vote of the Nam clan. I am the 3rd son, not the head." Daniel said, "But you control the Chamber of Commerce. Without it, the Nam clan loses 60% of its income. Your father listens to you more than you think." Nam Gi-hyun smiled. "You've already figured that out." Daniel replied, "On the very first day we met." Nam Gi-hyun finished his tea. He stood up and said, "I'll talk to my father, but I need something in return." Daniel waited. Nam Gi-hyun said, "When this is over, if it ends in your favor, the Nam clan wants a trade alliance with the Seo family, an exclusive one, for 10 years. Daniel held out his hand. Nam Gi-hyun shook it. Then he left. Daniel sat alone in the courtyard. "I have 1 vote. I need 1 more, just in case, because a good lawyer always has a backup plan." Jung Mirae came to the Seo house as a chronicler and recorded the stories of all 6 girls. Daniel and Sonmi worked together to prepare a strategy for the hearings. Nam Gi-hyun warned that the council was preparing to seal off the Seo clan. Daniel formed an alliance with the Nam clan in exchange for and secured 1 vote against the sealing. 2 weeks before the hearings, Han Jeongok died. Not from illness, not from old age. An assassin came at night. Not for Daniel, for Ji-ah. The system woke him up 3 seconds before the strike. Threat, critical, distance, east wing. Daniel ran barefoot down the hallway. Soyeon ran faster, but Han Jeongok was the closest. She was sleeping in a small room between the kitchen and the east wing. She heard the footsteps before the system did. She got up. She stepped out into the hallway. She saw a shadow by Jia's door, and she stood between them. A small, thin woman with hands red from endless laundry. No weapon, no scream. She just stood there. The knife pierced her ribs. She didn't fall right away. She grabbed the killer by the wrist with both hands and held on. 3 seconds. 4. long enough for Soyeon to run over. The sound of the sword. Short. Wet. The killer fell. Soyeon stood over him, the sword covered in blood. Han Jeongok sat on the floor by Jia's door, her hands pressed against her stomach, blood between her fingers. Daniel fell to his knees beside her. Eunhae was already running over with her medical bag. Han Jeongok looked at Daniel. She said, "The girl." Daniel said, "Jia is fine. The door is locked. The bolt is in place. She's fine." Han Jeongok nodded. She closed her eyes. Eunhae went to work, quickly, precisely. The healer's hands moved without a tremor. Herbs, needles, pressure. But the wound was too deep. The knife had cut into something inside that couldn't be healed with herbs. Han Jeongok died 40 minutes later, silently, without opening her eyes. The last thing she said was, "I've already soaked the rice for breakfast. Don't forget to drain the water in the morning." Daniel sat next to her on the floor of the hallway, holding her hand, small, dry, still warm. Everyone stood around them. Sonmi by the wall. Her face was stony. Her hands were clenched into fists. Ha-in was on her knees. Eunhae had blood on her hands. Soyeon held a sword. Dayeon stood in the doorway. Mirae held paper and ink. She was writing it down, even now, because this too was a truth that needed to be told. Jia opened the door. She saw it, and she screamed. It was the first loud sound she had made in the entire time she'd been at the Seo household. A scream without words, just a scream. Daniel stood up. He walked over to Jia. He didn't hug her. He just stood beside her. She grabbed his sleeve and squeezed so hard that the fabric crackled. He stood there and let her hold on, for as long as she needed. For 3 days, Daniel hadn't eaten or slept. He wrote, scroll after scroll. His hand moved without stopping. When the ink ran out, he reached for a new bottle. When the scrolls ran out, he wrote on the backs of old documents. He was searching for information about Han Jeongok. The system helped. The network parameter was set to 10,000. Information flowed to him like water. Han Jeongok, born Han, born on the East Coast. The village of Sohe, a fisherman's daughter, married a cook from the Seo clan 30 years ago. Her husband died. They had no children. She has a brother, Han Dong-soo, a fisherman. He lives in the village of Sohe. Daniel sent him a letter, a money transfer, and a document, a charter. The Han Jeongok Scholarship for the daughters of fishermen on the East Coast who wish to learn to read and write. First intake, 12 girls. Funded by the Seo clan's trading profits. Indefinite. On the 4th day, Daniel went out to the dining hall. Everyone was there, for the first time ever. All 7 of them at one table. Sonmi, Eunhae, Ha-in, Soyeon, Jia, Dayeon, Mirae. They were waiting for him. Daniel placed a scroll on the table. He said, "This is her name. Han Jeongok. She was the daughter of a fisherman from the East Coast. She has a brother left behind. I found him. I've established a scholarship in her name. The first cohort, 12 girls. I want her name to live on longer than we do." Sonmi was the first to cry. She hadn't cried in a year and a half. Not during the harvest. Not when she found out her father had sold her. Not when Daniel broke the chains. Not when he gave her the papers granting her free status. She was crying now, silently, tears streaming down her cheeks, her back straight. Then Eunhae began to cry. Then Ha-in. Then Soyeon. It was the first time in her life that Soyeon had cried in front of others. Then Jia. Then Dayeon. Then Mirae, who was taking notes and crying at the same time. Then Daniel. He was the last to cry, quietly, briefly, because he couldn't afford to cry for long. The hearing was in 10 days. and he had to be ready. But he allowed himself 10 minutes. 10 minutes at the table, among 7 women, in a house that smelled of rice that Han Jeongok had soaked before her death, which they had cooked that morning, and which was a little too salty, as always. The system didn't flinch. No points. There are some things the system doesn't measure. That evening, Sonmi came to him, not to his room, to the steps in the courtyard, where he was sitting and looking at the stars. She sat down next to him, closer than usual, within a hand's reach. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. They sat in silence for an hour. Then she stood up and left. But before she left, she placed her hand on his shoulder for just a second. That was enough. A hired assassin broke into Seo's house to kill Jia. Han Jeongok shielded her with her own body and died. Soyeon killed the assassin. Daniel didn't eat or sleep for 3 days, and then he established the Han Jeongok Scholarship. For the first time, everyone gathered around the same table, and for the first time, they cried together. Seo's house became a family. 10 days until the hearings. The public hearings were scheduled to take place in North Assembly Square, not in a hall, in the square. 3,000 seats. 5,000 people showed up. People were standing on rooftops, in trees, on walls. All of northern Hajo wanted to see the Council of the 7 Clans destroy the madman from the Seo clan, or the madman destroy the council. The odds on the market were 10-1 against Daniel. He knew it. He didn't care. That morning, before the hearings, he checked everything one last time. Scrolls, documents, testimonies, copies. 3 sets. 1 for the temple arbiter, 1 for the council, 1 for Mirae, just in case the first 2 went missing. He put on a simple robe. No clan insignia, no adornments. Barefoot. Just like in his duel with Hwan Dae-jun. It had become his trademark. The whole city knew, the barefoot lawyer from the Seo family. They were waiting for him at the gate. Everyone. Sonmi in a dark dress, her hair pulled back, her back straight as an arrow, a bundle of documents in her hands. She was walking as his second attorney, because that's what she was. Eunhae with her medical bag, just in case someone fainted. She's a doctor. She's always ready. In red. For the first time in 5 months, she wore a bright color. It was a statement. She'd told Daniel that morning, red is the color of temple dancers. They think we're their property. Let them see that we choose what to wear ourselves. Soyeon in battle gear, a sword at her belt. She made no attempt to hide her weapon. The 3rd lotus of cultivation. Open. Let them see that the Seo household is guarded by a warrior, not just a lawyer. Ja wore a simple dress, a scroll in her hands. Not testimony, a scroll with her name on it. One she wrote herself, her talisman. Moon Dayeon walked last. Quiet, petite, a jade scar on her neck. She wore an open-necked top, on purpose, so the scar would be visible. Meyer with paper and ink, ready to write down every word. 8 people, 7 women and 1 man, barefoot, across the entire city, to the square. People parted, they watched, they were silent. No one laughed. The Northern Assembly Square, a stone platform in the center, 7 chairs for the clan leaders, all occupied. 7 old men in heavy robes bearing their clan seals. Hwan Chang-min, head of the Hwan clan, Sonmi's father. He looked at his daughter. She did not look at him. Standing behind the chairs was the high priest Hwan Chol-su, 70 years old, the 7th lotus, head of the Black Lotus faction, the most dangerous man in Haeju. Daniel could feel his presence in his bones. 33,000 perceptions were screaming, danger. This man can kill you with a glance. Literally. The 7th lotus. Daniel wasn't looking at him. Not yet. The arbitrator announced, hearings in the case of the Council of the 7 Clans versus the Seo clan. Charge. Violation of the Code of the Single Chain. Illegal seizure of 5 chains. The prosecution presented its case. The council representative spoke for an hour, long, complex, many references to tradition, to order, to stability, on the fact that the world is held together by the code and that one person cannot decide for everyone. Daniel listened. He took notes. He noted the weak points. There were 12 of them. When the representative finished, the arbitrator gave the floor to the defense. Daniel stood up. He stepped onto the platform. 5,000 pairs of eyes. Silence. He said, "I won't speak for an hour. I'll be brief. The prosecution claims that I violated the code. That is a lie. I violated tradition. These are different things. The code is the law. Tradition is a habit. The law can be verified. A habit can only be repeated. Let's verify this." He took out the first scroll, the code of the single chain, Article 1, the text, word for word. He read it. Then he said, "The word once does not appear in this article. The phrase single chain does. I activated 5 chains, one at a time, sequentially. Each activation was a separate act of choice. Formally, legally, literally. I did not violate Article 1. I applied it 5 times." A murmur rose from the crowd. The council representative jumped to his feet. "That's sophistry," he said. Daniel replied, "This is textual analysis. If the council believes the text of the article allows for a different interpretation, let them point out the specific words I have violated. Specific words, not the spirit, not the meaning, not tradition. Words." The representative unfurled the scroll. He read. He was silent. He read on. He remained silent. Because there were no words. The article was written 7,000 years ago. No one had checked the wording. No one thought anyone would dare. Daniel gave him a minute. Then he continued. "But that's not the point. Here's what matters. The prosecution speaks of order, of stability, of a world upheld by the code. Fine. Let's talk about how the council itself adheres to this code." He turned to Sonmi. She stood up. She walked to the podium. She placed the first bundle of documents on the arbitrator's table. Daniel read, "Violation number 1, Rod Hwan, year 211. Activation of the chain on the 13-year-old captive Moon Dayeon. Article 22, minimum age 15. Moon Dayeon, please stand." Moon Dayeon stood up, small, thin, a scar on her neck. 5,000 people were watching her. She stood there, never lowering her gaze. Daniel continued, "Violation number 2, 3, 4. He read for 20 minutes, not all 123, 40, the most serious ones, the most irrefutable ones, with dates, with names, with seals that Sonmi had copied from her father's office. The square was silent. 5,000 people, and a silence so deep you could hear the wind rustling the scrolls on the arbitrator's table. When Daniel finished, 4 of the 7 clan leaders were sitting with pale faces. Hwang Changmin was gripping the armrests so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The other 2 stared at the floor. The 4th looked toward the exit. Daniel said, "I do not demand punishment. I do not demand the sealing of the 4 lineages, although I have the right to do so, under the very same code that the council accuses me of violating. I demand one thing, an amendment to Article 1. One word, consent. A woman's consent as a mandatory condition for activating the chain." Silence. The arbiter called a recess. 2 hours. The clan leaders left to consult. The square was buzzing. Daniel sat on the steps of the platform. Soyeon stood beside him. Her sword was in its sheath, but her hand rested on the hilt. Sonmi sat nearby with documents on her lap, ready, in case the remaining 83 violations were needed. Mirae was writing, quickly, page after page. Ha-in brought Daniel some water. He drank it. His hands weren't shaking. For the first time since his public speech, his hands weren't shaking. It felt strange. He thought about it and realized he wasn't afraid. Not because he had become braver, but because there were 7 people standing behind him, and he was ashamed to be afraid in front of them. An hour later, a man approached Daniel, an old man, 70 years old, white robes, eyes like 2 bottomless wells, the high priest Hwang Chol-su, the 7th lotus. Daniel stood up. Soyeon stepped forward, her hand on her sword. Hwang Chol-su raised his palm, a gesture of peace. He said, "I want to talk, in private." Daniel looked at Soyeon. She shook her head. Daniel said to the priest, "Not in private, in front of witnesses." "Whatever you have to say to me, you'll say in front of them." Hwang Chol-su looked at the 7 women behind Daniel, then at Daniel. Then he nodded. They sat down on the steps of the platform, the high priest of the 7th lotus and a barefoot lawyer from an impoverished family. Hwang Chol-su said, "You know who you are." Daniel replied, "Seo Jaeho, heir to the Seo clan." Hwang Chol-su shook his head. "No, you are Seo Jaeho, the founder of the Seo clan, the one who has returned." Daniel was silent for 3 seconds. He knew that name, Seo Jaeho, from his body's memory, from a fragment of a lesson. The founder of the clan, the lawgiver, killed at the assembly. Hwang Chol-su continued, 7,000 years ago, Seo Jaeho created the celestial accounting system. He was a lawyer in the ancient kingdom. He wanted to stop the clan war. He proposed a code of peace. He was killed for it. Before his death, he sealed the system and left a single command within it. Wait. Wait until the same soul returns. And when it returns, give it what it lacked last time. Time, tools, and an infinite number of attempts. Daniel listened. His face was calm. Inside, a storm raged. Hwang Chol-su said, "I knew you would come. In the archives of the Black Lotus Temple, there is a scroll, 7,000 years old. Your face is on it, drawn before you were born. I saw you at the harvest and recognized you." Daniel asked, "Why didn't you stop me back then?" Hwang Chol-su replied, "Because I wanted to see what you would do." 7,000 years ago, Seo Jaeho proposed repealing the code before it was adopted. He was killed. The code was adopted. And it worked. 7,000 years of peace. Cruel, unjust, but peace. No clan war. No massacres like there were before the code. Do you know how many people died in the clan war before the code? Daniel didn't know. Hwang Chol-su said, 2 million. Over 40 years. The code put a stop to it, at the cost of the freedom of those who were bound by chains. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying the alternative was worse. Daniel was silent. He thought. Then he said, "You're right. The alternative was worse. 7,000 years ago. But now it's the 214th year of the Sleeping Dragon era. The clans have degenerated. There hasn't been a war for 400 years. The code no longer prevents war. It simply allows the strong to take the weak just because it's written on some old piece of paper. A law that has existed longer than the reason it was created is not a law. It's inertia." Hwang Chol-su looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "So Jaeho would have said the same thing, word for word." Daniel replied, "I'm not Seo Jaeho." Hwang Chol-su raised an eyebrow. Daniel said, I know the system wants me to be him. It offered me a merger, full ancestral memory, full power. I refused. I'm not him. I'm Daniel Seo, a lawyer from San Francisco. I'll finish his work, but with my own hands, in my own way. Hwang Chol-soo was silent for a minute. Then he stood up. He said, I won't vote for your amendment. Daniel nodded. He'd expected that. Hwang Chol-soo added, but I won't vote against it. He turned and walked away. Daniel sat on the steps. Behind him, 7 women had heard every word. Sonmi approached first. She said, Seo Jaeho, you're his descendant, his reincarnation. Daniel replied, or just a man who ended up with his job. Sonmi sat down beside him. She said, it's the same thing. The 2-hour break ended. The clan leaders returned. The arbitrator announced the vote. Amendment to the Single Chain Code. Article 1, Addendum. A woman's consent is a mandatory condition for activating the chain. In favor of the amendment, the Nam clan. Yes. Nam Gi-hyun kept his word. The Jung clan. Yes. Daniel hadn't expected it. Then he remembered. Meyer. Jung Meyer. The Jung clan. She's a journalist from the Jung clan. Her article reached the clan leader, and the leader read it. The Park clan. Yes. Daniel looked at Eunhae, Park Eunhae, the healer, who saved the heir to the Park clan 3 months ago. The heir had survived. The Park clan remembered. The Lee clan. Yes. The 4th vote. Daniel didn't know why. Then he saw a face in the crowd. A woman in military uniform. She looked like Soyeon, one of her sisters, whom Daniel had found and brought to the Seo household. She had served in the Lee clan's guard. She spoke with the head of the clan. 4 votes out of 7. Enough. The Hwang clan. Against, as expected. The Koo clan. Against. Their name appeared 11 times in Sonmi's documents. The Moon clan. Abstained. The arbitrator announced 4 in favor, 2 against, 1 abstention. The amendment was passed. The square erupted, not with applause, with a scream, a roar, 5,000 voices at once. Daniel stood on the platform, barefoot in a simple robe, alone, and yet not alone, because Sonmi stood beside him and said, I bear witness. Eunhae stood up. I bear witness. Ha-in stood up. I bear witness. Soyeon stood up. I bear witness. Jia stood up. I bear witness. Dayeon stood up. I bear witness. Mirae stood up. She didn't say, I bear witness. She said, I'm taking notes. 8 people on the platform, 7 women, 1 man. And behind them, others rose from the crowd, one after another, women. 10, 20, 50, 100, 120. Those Mirae had found over the past month. Those whose story she had recorded. Those who had come because, for the first time in their lives, someone had asked their names. 128 women stood in the Northern Assembly Square and remained silent. And their silence was louder than any scream. The high priest revealed to Daniel the secret of his origin as the reincarnation of Seo Jaeho and explained why the codex had been created. Daniel refused to merge with his ancestor. In the vote, 4 of the 7 supported the amendment on consent. 128 women stood as witnesses. The codex was not repealed, but for the first time in 7,000 years, the word consent appeared in it. The square emptied slowly. People dispersed in small groups, quietly, like after a funeral or after a birth. Something had died today and something had been born, and no one yet knew which was greater. Daniel stood on the platform and watched as the clan leaders left. Hwang Chang-min was the last to go. He stopped at the edge of the square. He turned around. He looked at his daughter. Sonmi stood next to Daniel and didn't look at her father. Hwang Chang-min stood there for 5 seconds. Then he left. Daniel saw his face. 33,000 perceptions. The face of a man who realized he had lost something that could never be recovered. Not power, not status. His daughter. Daniel didn't tell Sonmi. She knew. They walked home, all 8 of them, through the city. People watched, but now they weren't silent. Some nodded, some spoke quietly. A barefoot lawyer, the Seo residence, the word agreement. Nam Gi-hyun was waiting for them at the gate of the Seo residence, with a bottle of rice wine and a contract for a trade union. 10 years, exclusive. The Nam family seal. Daniel signed it. Nam Gi-hyun said, "My father wants to see you, in person, in a week." Daniel nodded. Nam Gi-hyun left. Daniel entered the house. Into the courtyard. He sat down on the steps. The very same ones. The ones he'd sat on that first day when he was shaking after the harvest. The very same ones he'd sat on when Gia told him her name. The very same ones he'd sat on when Sonmi put her hand on his shoulder after Han Jeongok's death. He sat down and closed his eyes. The system flashed. But not with numbers, not with points, not with bonuses. A single line. Simple. Seo Jaeho's mission. Phase 1 complete. Thank you. Now rest. Daniel opened his eyes. He looked at the line. Then he closed the interface. Not now. Sonmi came out into the courtyard. Behind her was Eunhae. Behind her was Ha-in. Behind her was Soyeon. Behind her was Ji-ah. Behind her was Moon Dayeon. Behind her was Mirae. 7 women in the courtyard of the Seo household. Ha-in said, "We need a new cook." Soyeon said, "We need a new wall on the north side. I found 4 more vulnerabilities." Eunhae said, "I received medical scrolls from the southern caravan. I need 1 more room for the clinic." Gia said, "I want to study law, not just literacy. I want to do what you all do." Moon Dayeon said, "I want to help those who are in hiding, just as I was once in hiding. I know every hiding place in the eastern quarter. I can find them." Mirae said, "I need a printing press." Daniel looked up. "A printing press," Mirae said. "Handwritten copies spread slowly. If we want people to know the truth, we need another way, one that's fast and reaches a mass audience." "You once mentioned that in your world there was a machine that could make hundreds of copies of a single text in a day." Daniel looked at her. He had indeed mentioned it, in passing, during a conversation. She remembered. "I'll draw a sketch," he said. Mirae nodded. Sonmi said nothing. She sat down next to Daniel on the steps, closer than ever, shoulder to shoulder, and handed him a cup of tea. Daniel took it. Hot. Slightly bitter. Sonmi brewed her tea too strong. He drank. She sat beside him in silence. Daniel thought, the code hasn't been repealed. An amendment isn't a repeal. It's the first step, the first of 1,000. The council has lost face but hasn't lost power. The 4 clans voted in favor, but that doesn't mean they've become allies. It means that on that day, it was in their interest to vote in favor. Tomorrow, that interest might change. The Hwan clan will seek revenge. The Ku clan will seek revenge. The high priest did not vote against it, but that does not mean he is on Daniel's side. It means he's waiting and watching. The second phase lies ahead, a refuge for women fleeing the harvest, a legal precedent, a class action lawsuit, the convening of the Grand Assembly, the repeal of the code in its entirety. This is a task that will take years, perhaps a decade. But today, right now, on these steps, under the evening sky of Haeju, with a cup of tea, with 7 people nearby. You can just sit here. Jaya approached. She sat down at his feet. She took out a scroll and a brush. She wrote characters, silently, intently. Daniel looked down. She wasn't writing a practice exercise. She was writing a name. Han Jeongok. Over and over again, in even, precise characters. The calligraphy he had taught her in the evenings. Daniel turned away. He looked up at the sky. It was violet. 2 suns were setting, one behind the mountains, the other behind the clouds. Double shadows fell across the courtyard. On the newly repaired Soyeon wall. On the door to the south hall where Hayoung had danced. On the east wing with its 6 closed doors, behind which lay 6 rooms with 6 locks. On the Eunhae clinic. On Mir's table, piled high with papers. On the courtyard where Moon Dayeon sat stroking the cat that lived on the roof, and that no one chased away. The Seo house. 3 courtyards, 2 wings, walls of gray stone, restored, clean, alive. Daniel closed his eyes. A second later, he felt a weight on his shoulder. Light, warm. Sonmi had rested her head on his shoulder. Not like at the harvest, when everything was fear and stone. Like now, when the courtyard smells of rice and someone is writing the dead cook's name over and over so it won't fade away. Daniel didn't move. He breathed. The air of Haeju, thick, sweet, like after a thunderstorm. The system was silent. For the first time in 5 months, she wasn't blinking. She wasn't counting points. She wasn't displaying threat levels. She wasn't suggesting she invest points. She was simply silent, as if she too had decided to rest. Daniel Seo, 27 years in one life, 21 in another, a lawyer, a time traveler, the heir to an impoverished family, the reincarnation of a man who was killed 7,000 years before his birth, guardian of 7 women, owner of a magazine containing enough names to shake a continent. A man with an infinite number of points that cannot be spent on power. Barefoot, tired, with a cup of tea that's too strong in his hand, and with Hwang Song-mi's head resting on his shoulder. He didn't open his eyes. He listened. Jia's brush on paper, Soyeon's footsteps in the courtyard, Ha-in's quiet laughter in the kitchen, the rustle of Mirae's pages, the clinking of Eunhae's test tubes at the clinic, the purring of the cat on Moon Dayeon's lap, Sonmi's breath beside him, steady, calm for the first time. 7 sounds, 7 lives, 1 house. Daniel didn't move. He didn't open his eyes. He didn't think about tomorrow. Tomorrow will come. The council will seek revenge. The killers will come. The clans will resist. The high priest will watch. The journal will grow. The hearings will continue. The war to repeal the codex has only just begun. But that's tomorrow. Right now, it's spring, and the rain is starting. Light, warm. Haeju's spring rain. Drops fall on the stone steps, on his face, on his hands. Sonmi doesn't lift her head from his shoulder. Jaya covers the scroll with her palm but doesn't leave. No one leaves. 8 people sit in the courtyard of the Seo family home in the spring rain and don't leave. Because there's nowhere to go. Because they're already home. Daniel Seo falls asleep on the steps. For the first time in 5 months. For the first time in 7,000 years. In the rain. Next to the people who came to him to hate him, but stayed because they wanted to. Not because he asked them to. Not because the system awarded points. Not because the code required it. Because they wanted to. And that is worth more than an infinite.